Hello, all. My name is Jacqueline Cody. It's so great to have you join me for this recorded session of our de-escalation overview. So I welcome you, and I'm so glad that you are here. Thank you for joining this recording of our PLCamp session from October 24th. So, as I mentioned, my name is Jacqueline Cody. I work at Lakewood Elementary School as the staff development teacher. This is my 19th year in Montgomery County. I spent 12 years teaching second and third grade, and this is my 7th year as a staff development teacher. My email is below. Please feel free to reach out to me with any questions about this presentation. I do want to share that I created a note-taking guide that kind of guides you through the different reflections and discussion that we will be participating in together. And you are welcome to make a copy of that as you follow along in the presentation to fill in some notes on your own as we go through the slides. Okay. So today we're going to really focus on two things: identifying the causes of student anxiety and defensive behaviors, and then reviewing a variety of strategies to de-escalate students. So this is one of my personal favorite quotes relating to student behavior and de-escalation that they utilize at the CPI trainings, if you've ever been CPI certified. And I like to keep this in the forefront of my mind. And it's a real challenge for me a lot of times to keep this in the forefront of my mind while I'm teaching a class and it's being disrupted and things like that. It's easy to let frustration get the better of us, right? But the child isn't giving you a hard time. The child is having a hard time. We know that across the last couple of years, all of our students all of us collectively have experienced a trauma with the COVID-19 pandemic. And so we're seeing major increases in students who cannot self-regulate their behavior. And that has been something that's been increasing across many years leading up to the pandemic. And then the pandemic has just exacerbated that for some of our students. So this is just some statistics to kind of highlight the increases that we were seeing even before the pandemic started. And then here you can see a few more statistics. And again, these came from a period 2016 to 2019 prior to the start of the pandemic. These were the approximate numbers of students nationwide who are being impacted by these four most common anxiety or behavior problems. Okay, so we're focused today on de-escalation. So of course it's really important to understand the escalation cycle and what happens during a student getting escalated, or anyone, right? But obviously our focus is students today. So what we're trying to do here is really focus on after a student has been triggered, can we catch them as they're getting agitated and accelerating and de-escalate the situation so that it doesn't reach that peak level. And then, the de-escalation is kind of the come down after that peak level, but to hope to avoid the peak and kind of get them out of the cycle. So our students have a variety of triggers or stressors going on. Some are things that we can control, some are things that we can't control. Things that happen within school, as well as things that are happening at home. But it is important to know that a lot of times we may not notice or know about some of the triggers that a student has already experienced when they are presenting in front of us in an already anxious or defensive state. So just identifying these triggers and really thinking about what ones we can control and we can try to prevent in the first place. I think this is another graphic, kind of like, the mountain one, but I wanted to show how this can really cycle, right? So as a student is triggered or they're even showing up in front of you already triggered, obviously their thoughts and feelings may be escalating them and bringing them, to kind of demonstrate some of those behaviors that we recognize when we see them escalating and showing some of those behavior responses. And the way we respond is going to do one of two things, right? That's that fork in the road. We are going to respond to a student's behavior, and it's either going to further trigger and escalate the situation, or reaching our goal of de-escalating how that student is feeling and hopefully getting them to a place where they're able to calm down and then kind of rejoin the learning and the lesson for the day. So before we can really focus on student triggers and what may or may not be triggering student behavior, it's really important to identify what are your triggers. What are the student behaviors that you react really strongly to, that really get under your skin and bother you? And for some of us, that can even be, your emotional state where you start to enter that stressed and anxious or defensive state because of certain student behaviors. So take a moment on your reflection guide. You can pause the recording here to just reflect about that for a moment and identify some of those triggers. In the sessions on the day of PLCamp, we saw a lot of people sharing in the chat that they really felt that, for some people, calling out is a huge trigger, or being interrupted when they're speaking is a trigger. Being called certain disrespectful names is a trigger, or some teachers put, much more severe behaviors such as hitting or students throwing objects and things like that as major triggers where they, enter their own agitated state. So again, when we're trying to keep in the forefront of our minds that students are having a hard time and they're not giving us a hard time, we really have to, put that reflection and that thought into it going in, because once we're triggered, it's hard to keep that rational thought in the forefront of our minds. Another good one that they say a lot at the CPI training that I wanted to elevate here today is the Q-tip, right? Quit taking it personally. Again, when you're triggered, it's so hard. It's easier said than done. But if you've spent that time reflecting about the student behaviors that bother you the most and really thinking about why, it can help you to depersonalize it in real time when it's happening. So we have to keep in mind that when a student is in an escalated state, and really when anyone is in an escalated state, but again, we're focusing on students here, we have two primary objectives, and that is to keep the students safe and to try to help them calm down. It's not going to be a teachable moment where we can get them to revisit the incident or get them to apologize or discuss consequences with them. They're not necessarily in a rational state, especially when they've kind of left that anxious state and they've crossed over into the defensive or risk level behaviors. They are not available for reflection and teaching about the behavior. We have to focus on these two things. And then when they have kind of come back to us, and they're demonstrating that they are ready and available, that is when we revisit and we discuss consequences and we talk about, restorative practices and things like that. In the moment, we're just trying to keep them safe and get them to calm down. So, for the purpose of this session, we are really focusing on the first two levels of behavior, anxiety and defensive, because these are often behaviors that can be teacher managed in the classroom. Not saying they always will be teacher managed, but they usually can be if you put de escalation measures into practice. Once a student has kind of left the defensive level and they are into risk behaviors, and that would be, violent, unsafe behaviors that they are demonstrating, where it's either about their safety or the safety of others, that's no longer something that you would be able to manage on your own, and you would be reaching out for a team of supports who are all CPI crisis certified to be able to come and help with that situation. When we look at anxiety and defensive behavior levels, we have to have an appropriate match for the behaviors that we're seeing with our attitude and our approach. There are different strategies that we would put in place for students who are exhibiting the anxiety behavior level. We're going to meet that with a supportive approach. And when they've reached the defensive behavior level, they're starting to kind of lose that sense of rationality and reason. You're going to be a lot more directive with them in your attitude and your approach to matching where they are. So, for those anxiety behaviors, take a moment to pause the video and write in your reflection tool what types of behaviors, what does it look like? What does it sound like when you have a student who is experiencing that anxiety behavior level? Here are a list of some of the things you may see from students when they are into that anxiety level. Tapping of feet, fidgeting, non-cooperating behaviors, a lot of movement, trying to get out of the classroom, bathroom breaks, nurse, things like that, possibly breathing changes and crying. And again, we're going to meet the student at that anxiety level with the um, supportive approach, right? Checking in with them, keeping a really calm and soothing tone, asking them what they need or how you can help them, and checking in with them are all good matches for this anxiety level. When a student is further triggered or further escalates on their own, then they're reaching the defensive level. So take a moment again to pause the video and just reflect about what that looks like and what that sounds like at the defensive level for our students. Here are some examples of defensive level behavior. So a student is further agitated. They may start talking back, shouting, yelling, and cursing, become non-compliant, invading people's space, and things like that. Again, the student is starting to, they're not available for conversation and reflection about what's happening. So you're going to get very directive. And that is the match for these kind of behaviors. So you're going to give very clear instructions with a lowered, again, low, calm voice. If we start to yell and escalate at a student who's shouting and talking back, we are not going to be able to de-escalate that student. Setting limits, and there are some setting limits sentence frames included in the note-taking guide to give you some examples of what that would look like and sound like. Presenting students with two choices that are both appropriate and safe choices that you can allow them to do, but still giving that student some sense of control over the situation can also really help to de-escalate a student who's reached the defensive state. And we're going to go through a variety of more strategies, but these are just some general matches for the defensive behavior level. Another really important tactic that they teach in the CPI training that I wanted to elevate here is called the supportive stance. And this can really work for both students in anxiety and defensive, but I would say especially for students once they've gone into the defensive behavior level. First of all, it promotes safety, your safety, because at any time when a student has reached that defensive behavior level, they may go into risk behavior level where it does become an unsafe situation. So you're presenting the side of your body here to them, and that is going to keep you safe. You're not opening up the front of your body in case of any kind of physical behavior coming to the forefront. It also really kind of conveys respect, right? Especially for teachers of younger students. If we're face on, like head on with them, we will be towering over many of our students, and that can be very intimidating and may trigger students. And even if we crouch down and we get on eye level and our intent is to convey, uh, a certain amount of, non-intimidation, it can still be intimidating for certain students if we're kind of getting really close and we are kind of putting our face right in theirs, even if our intent is to show that we're, crouching down to try to be supportive. So the supportive stance kind of conveys that respect as non-challenging or threatening. Another not it's verbal because it's our communication, but it's kind of nonverbal is really thinking about the tone and quality of your pitch, our volume and intensity, as well as our cadence, right? So I know that as a teacher, I have a very strong teacher voice. I'm pretty loud, right? So keeping that in mind when I have a student that is escalated, it's also something I have to be really conscious of and work on because I'm naturally loud. And so as I get escalated or stressed, I definitely get louder, right? And I match volume. So if a student is getting agitated and starting to raise their voice, it's something that I'll naturally do completely subconsciously, and I have to be really thoughtful to try to keep my volume and my intensity lowered. So just keeping that in mind because it can be such a trigger for some of our students. And this is just an example with the tone, cadence, and pitch, right? This statement or question, do you understand the information you've just been given, can be said and have so many different meanings depending on the way that it might be said to a person, right? And what they'll understand, even though the words are the exact same, depending on the way you say it, sarcastic or just the volume and cadence alone can really convey care or it can convey frustration. So again, just that just is a little example to kind of highlight the importance of that. Another kind of simple strategy that we really have to consider is physical space as well as our approach, right? For everyone, the amount of physical space that they need is a little bit different, right? Everyone has a slightly different definition of what would be considered intimate. This graphic I like is kind of made with some generalities that most people would say that if you're closer than 1.5 feet away, you're very close and you are in their space. And we all have students that we know are calmed by a hand on the shoulder or something like that, and we'll find it comforting and de-escalating. And then we have students who that's not going to be calming for them. And that really comes down to knowing the kids in your classroom and knowing what is going to be triggering for them and what they're going to find kind of soothing. So just keeping that in mind that when you're within 4 feet, a student is going to consider you in their personal space. And you might be doing that purposefully, right? To do some proximity and things like that. But entering someone's intimate space can often be a trigger. And just being really aware of that. Active listening is a great strategy when we are seeing a student enter that anxiety state, right? Demonstrating active listening. Here are some, conversation starters that you might use to try to get a student to kind of open up to you and let you know what's going on internally that may help them kind of calm down from that anxious state. An incompatible alternative can really be used in both phases, anxiety or defensive. So, incompatible alternative would be you're presenting them with another option. It's not necessarily what you really want them to be doing. It may mean that they're not completing the expected task for that lesson, but it's a way of keeping them engaged somehow in the classroom and giving them a little bit of a break to calm themselves down. So, a student is avoiding doing their problem set. They're up, they're out of their seat, they're wandering around, they're asking you to leave. And so you get them to do another activity within the classroom that is not their problem set. And then when they're calmer and they're more available, you try to, bring them back to that task that you were hoping to get them to complete. Planned ignoring, again, we can use this with a lot of the anxiety behaviors and some of the defensive behaviors. You're not going to be able to ignore all, but it means tolerating and not addressing a certain behavior for a short period of time. And it also can look like giving praise to students who are doing a good job with demonstrating appropriate behaviors, hoping that that student, hears your praise of others and kind of de-escalates and gets back on track. One thing that's really important to keep in mind with planned ignoring is we're ignoring the behavior, not the child. That's so crucial. Hurdle help is when you offer some support to a student. You know they're entering the anxious state or possibly even the defensive state because of, it's a subject that they really tend to struggle with or try to avoid. And so you're giving them a way to get started. It may be one of these strategies, like picking the easiest 5 problems in their problem set or crossing out any 3 that they don't want to do so that they have a semblance of control, but they're still completing some of the task that you were hoping to work on. In writing, it may look like, sit down with me. I will write the topic sentence for you that you can dictate the topic sentence to me, and then you're going to add in all the supporting details. So you're helping them get started so that the task doesn't feel as daunting and overwhelming. Interest boosting can be really great for students who typically experience both levels. And this can also be one that's really preventative, right? Before they've even gotten to the anxious or the defensive state, we're building in the students' interests so that we're hoping to prevent them getting to either of those levels. So again, that really comes down to knowing your students. It can also look like giving them a leadership role or a job that they really like in your classroom that will keep them engaged and motivated. An antiseptic bounce is a strategy that can be great for both, levels of behavior when you can see that a student needs a break. And maybe they haven't asked you for one directly, but you can see that they need one, right? So I'm going to write a fake note to another teacher saying, hey, this kid needs a break. And I'm going to say, hey, can you go deliver this to Mrs. So-and-so for me? I need her to get this message. And it just gives them a few moments out of the room to hopefully reset and be able to come back and be available for learning. Self-monitoring, again, is preventative. You really can't teach a student self-monitoring strategies when they're already escalated. This would be something that you do when the student is not in an anxiety or defensive state, where you're teaching them about how to notice how they're feeling and what strategies they can use to prevent escalating, right? So that might look like, talking to them about having a flash pass and when they're allowed to use it and how to notice how they're feeling when they need to use that flash pass, right? So that then they have it in their desk for the next time they do start to feel anxious and they know what to do with it. And that's just one example. And this kind of goes into that too, because a signal or timeout, and I don't mean timeout in the punitive kind of consequence state, right? But a student signaling to you that they need a timeout. And that could be like a flash pass or something like that, right? Or it could be a little hand signal between you and the student that's saying, I'm feeling frustrated. I feel myself needing a little break, and you and the student have agreed upon what that hand signal is and what it means, where they're allowed to go, what they're allowed to do, so on and so forth. If you have a calm down corner or something like that, that can be a place where they are able to just go and get, kind of de-stimulated and calm and rejoin you. Restructuring the environment can be really important, especially if you're seeing that a student is getting escalated by certain other students, right? So setup of your classroom is so crucial, and it can also mean having things like a calming corner and things like that in your room if you're seeing that that is something that some of your students need. Okay. So now comes the time when you are going to think about a student who you know is kind of struggling with or who is frequently entering the anxiety or the defensive behavior levels and is needing more support. So you're going to pause the video and take a moment in that reflection guide to really think about ways that you can connect with that student to try to strengthen that relationship between you and them. And then also what some of their triggers are, what times of day, and which of these strategies you might try to use to match the behaviors that they're typically exhibiting. So take a few minutes and fill in the reflection and then come back and unpause the video. Okay. So that is kind of the charge that we are left with, right? Is reflecting about a specific student and really trying to put some of these measures in place for a few weeks. Sometimes when we try something new with a student, it might really feel like it's not working. And it's important to, stick with it a little bit and let the student get used to it to really see if it's going to be effective. So that's why it says, about 2 weeks, try to come back to this reflection guide and look at what you wrote, see how well you did with implementing, and see how effective it was. And this is just a little reminder because, again, if we're not taking care of ourselves, if we're escalated, if we're in the anxiety state, it's very hard for us to be able to help our students to de-escalate and learn these self-monitoring strategies. So it's so crucial that, we take care of ourselves. And I know self-care is getting thrown around a lot. So I'm purposefully avoiding saying that, but it is an essential part of this. So I thank you again so much for taking part in this and taking part in PLCamp by watching this recording. There is no evaluation since this is a recording of a past presentation, but my email again is there. I hope that this was helpful and that you got a couple of new strategies for your toolbox for supporting our students. Thank you again for joining.